Okay, next, in previous session, we learned a lot about JavaScript, and not just previous, but a couple earlier sessions, we learned about JavaScript fundamentals and various data types and complex data type. We also learned about objects and arrays in our previous session. Objects are identified when you see a value which is put up in a pair of curly braces, and arrays are identified when you see a value put up inside a pair of big brackets. We also understood the difference between an object and an array. Arrays are named index, arrays are numbered index, objects are named index. There are two ways of accessing properties or members in objects. There is only one way possible in arrays. However, arrays gives you a lot of ready-made functionalities to deal with the elements. So we are going to use a few of them in our application. So yesterday we started with the application where the title was the only field to be getting value from the int user, and when you press the add button, that title's value was picked up and was added to a UL inside, as li inside a UL below. Correct? So we were not retaining the value ever. We were not assembling them together. We were just reading the value from the input field and creating an li right away and then adding it to the UL, right? It was quite simple. Today, we have more requirements. So we are not just going to get the title, but we will be getting title as well as description and something internally which is not taken from the user, but it is based on the user's actions. When user adds a new task, of course, the status is new or active. When user clicks on the task later, it changes the status from active to inactive, inactive to active, like that it toggles. So status is not taken by the user directly using the input fields, but it is a value which is associated with each task, and the value is changing on various actions performed by the user. So what is now needed is to retain the associated values. So title, description, and status has to be placed together, packed together, and then each unit of such a packed value has to be retained for future because the status is changing. You may not be changing the title, you may not be changing the description for now, but status is changing, and status is changing for each of that packet. So you have to have that packet retained separately, and with the change in the packet, the visualization is also changing. Earlier, we were not changing the list. We were only adding new items to the list. Now the visualization of each item will change. So I have to keep the data separated from visualization so that first I make change in the data and then recreate the visualization based on the latest state of the data, right? And this is going to be the case going forward for all web applications that we build. Data has to be separated from the visualization as much as possible so that you can have different visualizations created maybe on demand, or you switch from one type of visualization to another type of visualization while the data remains the same. So you have to have separation in data and visualization. And it is quite obvious. Like when we are taking the inputs, we don't really think of how it will be visualized, whether the title will be put up as H4 tag or H3 tag, and description will be in this font or that color, or status will be visible or not, or it will be imperative. All that is visualization that can be decided at a later stage. Okay, so We will begin with, first of all, changing the data capturing logic and storage of that. So we have this code written, and I can open it with Notepad, right? We can use it. We can open it in Notepad++. I was using Notepad++ so far because it gives me some good looking content. It gives me colorful things, so I can easily differentiate between the tag name to properties and to uh, the function calls and the template text and something like that, right? And then this is all style and this is all script. And script also, it is making few things colorful, and things are going to grow and get more complicated. You already see a whole lot of lines got added, and I have also changed the visualization a bit. Now I am not using UL to display the list of things. What I have done is I have put up a div, which is a container, okay, which is similar to UL, but I really did not require a list item because it's no more a single text value that will show up. It will be having multiple values. So it will be like a block of things. So UL and LI does not make sense now. If you realized, when I added something, it showed up like a block. Okay, so it is not good for an LI because LI will put a circle or disk here, which will really not make any sense. The visualization will not look good. So I have changed that element. Now it is no more a UL LI thing. It is a div and multiple divs inside the div. And each div will have its own block display. So it will appear in different lines. Fine. We can change that to appear in uh, the same line also as much as possible. All that is doable later. But for the time being, we are displaying each item, each task item in its own block, linearly, vertically, basically. All right, so that is the visualization part change. And in the first section where we were getting the value about the new task, I have now added few things. So earlier there was only one input, and we knew that is the value that will be taken. Now I have two inputs, so I must uh, label them, and that is the first change that I did here. Now earlier there was just a input box and a button, and we knew input box is where we will have to type. But now there are two input boxes practically, one input box and one text area. So now it has to have a proper description or proper label which says title and the description. Okay, so this is how the UI changes have been made. But UI changes are secondary. What is important for us to think about how the data will be stored together. So when I do a press of this button, when I click on this add, my objective is to pick value from here, pick value from here, and then maybe piece them together as one unit of data. So what is happening when I press the button? It makes a call to this function. You recognize this? I am having an on-click event handler. The name has been changed because earlier name was not making enough sense. I wanted to add a new task. The function name now is called add new task. Fine. Where is this defined? Somewhere in the script section. So I see function add new task is defined here. So now I have two inputs to get data from, and I have used the DOM functions, get element by ID on document by passing the IDs of them individually, and I get hold of the elements. Fine. So this is not new. You have seen this earlier. Then what I am doing, I am creating a variable type, variable name task. But do you notice something here? I'm initializing it with a pair of curly braces. That means this task is a object type because it has a value which is a pair of curly braces. That means it's an object which has no attribute at the moment, and I can always add attributes to an object. So that's the flexibility that I have. And how will I do that? We'll do it later. But before that, I'm making a little bit of validation. So I will prefer not to accept inputs when actually there is no input. Say it's empty at the moment and I press the add, I should not accept this because empty title means what? Nothing, right? So I should be putting some check. And to do that, I have some logic. I said, well, get the value property of the title element. So this was the title element that I picked. And then I'm saying, take the value of that. And value will be a primitive data of type string or text. So on the string, there is a function called trim. And trim function does what? It removes the spaces or space characters from either end, both ends actually. So if there are spaces, suppose I typed just space bar, right? It's all still empty. Practically, it will not have any visible content. So that is why I'm trimming, and I'm saying first remove everything which is useless from both the ends. And here, when it will be trimmed, it will end up with nothing, an empty text, right? Empty string, no characters inside that. So in that case also, title will be empty. So what I'm now doing, so I took the value from the element, input element, and trimmed it, and then that is stored in a local variable named title. Okay, and then here, immediately after taking that value, and basically it gives me a copy of the value, and then I'm saying task title dot value is equal to empty. That means here I was reading the task title's value, the element's value, and here I am setting the value, right? Here I read it, I got that, and here I am changing the value back to the empty element, so that as soon as the typing happened and it was even if it is empty, I took that value, trimmed it, stored it in a local variable, and then changed the value property of the element so that it is again clean. Fine. Now I am doing what? I am testing on the content of the value that I have read. And so here I'm saying if title, that means it is not null or undefined, which will be unlikely because value will always give me an empty string at least. So this will never evaluate to false. And then I have a double ampersand. If you can recall, this is the logical operator among the 3 types of operator or 4 type of operators we discussed yesterday: arithmetic operator, comparison operator, logical operators, and then type operators, type of and instance of. So this was among the logical operator, and it expects 2 Boolean expressions on either side at least, right? So title here means if title is undefined or not, and title dot length. So length is a property on string. So one method trim and one property length we have used on a string. So string is also basically a object, but in JavaScript world, string is actually treated like a primitive data type. Okay, so that is a confusion, but this is how it is. String, there are various functions available on string, properties are available on string, and the property that is available is length, and we are using that. So it says how many letters are present in this string. And if the length of the string is more than 0, so this is the comparison operator. So this has to be evaluated first, and the result of this and result of the other expression will be compared. So if both are resulting into true, that means if title is not undefined or not null, it will be undefined. It cannot be null because it is referring to a string, and which is a primitive. Null is for the objects. Undefined is for any variable. So if the title is not undefined and title's length is greater than 0, if both conditions are met, that is what the if says. If both conditions are met, then only you do what? Use this title value and assign it. This is the assignment operator. And where am I assigning? I'm assigning to the title property of what? Task object. So now you see the first notation of accessing the property is being used, and the notation of approach was dot operator. So object dot property, object dot property. You may see this title is used again and again, but remember, every variable has its own scope depending on where it has been defined and it is attached to which object. So this title is different from this title. Now here all of them are getting colored because it is matching for the word title, title, title. And here even, in fact, you see this one is also getting colored. So that's the lack of intelligence in the Notepad editor. Now, in some cases, we may want to use more intelligent editors, and I will tell you about an intelligent editor that you can use for creating web applications, but a little later. Okay, so all these titles are really not same. This title is associated with this task, so that is going to refer to a different thing than this title, which is a string. Okay, and this title is a literal completely. It's a constant, which is not referring to a variable or not referred by a variable. Okay, so what is happening? The value of this title, which is the string that is built from the input element, is now being assigned to the title property of the task object. And this is how task object gets its first property named title, and value of that is picked up from the input box, the title input box, right? So this is how the whole cycle gets completed. You read the thing from the task title or the title input box, you do some verification on that it has the useful content, and once you have the useful content, you assign it to a property named title inside the task object. So task object gets its first property. Fine. And by chance, if you did not find anything useful, you show an alert to the user and then immediately stop building or adding the new task. You don't want to proceed. You don't want to go with the rest of the steps, so you return from the function. So the rest of the function statements will not be executed. But if was executed, else will not be executed. So that is how the if-else construct works. Now, I have not explained you these separately in JavaScript, but there are various constructs: if construct, for construct, while construct, and do while construct, switch case construct. These are some important things that we must know about JavaScript. We may spend a little time on learning about these constructs tomorrow, but these are fundamental pieces of any programming language where you will have such logical things. Anyway, so for the time being, you can simply make a sense of this. If these conditions are met, this part of the logic will get executed, and if it fails, it does not evaluate to correct, then else part of the logic will get executed. So it's like a mutually exclusive section. All right, so if was true, then it will proceed further, and then it will take the value from the second input box, which is task desk, take the value and assign it to the second property of task, which is desk. Again, using the same dot notation, task dot desk is equal to the value read from the second input box, and then second input box's value has been set to empty. because the current value has already been read and it is a copy of the original value. So that is not going to change if the property of the second input box has been changed to contain 0. And then I'm also setting the third property. So we have already set two properties, title property, desk property, and now I am setting the status property. Now for this, I did not have to read it from anywhere, right? Because there is no input box for that. So I am setting it to a constant value, and I said active. So by now, task has three properties set: title, desk, and status. So now task object is ready with three properties. Okay. And then what I am saying, there is a task list variable somewhere defined, and I am making a call to push function of that. So let's take a look at task list. And where is this defined? It is defined outside of any function but inside the script, and it is defined like this: task list variable task list equals, you see this notation, and this is different from this notation here. This is curly braces and this is big bracket. So big bracket indicates array, curly bracket indicates an object. So definitely task list is of type array. Fine. And you can recognize the push function. I explained you push function is available in array. So I can make a call to that function on the array object, and to make a call to any function or to access any property, we always use the dot operator, right? We have been seeing this for quite a while. It's like document dot get element by ID. So get element by ID is a method of exposed on a document object, and to get hold of that or to execute, we use the dot operator. So similarly, push function or push method is defined on an array, and that is available on this array. So I'm making call to that using the dot operator. So task list dot push, and push expects a value. So I'm saying now take this value. And what is this value? An object that has been built so far. So it takes that object and adds to the list at the end of the list. And I'm not really interested in the index because I'm not going to use it right now. So my purpose was to just add it. The alternative approach could have been, so if I comment this out, this is how I can comment things in JavaScript: a pair of slashes. Double slash indicates the line is commented. Okay, so if I comment the line, it will not get executed. So I'm telling you, push does what? It adds the element at the end. I could do the same in this format. So I say task list dot length -1, and then I assign a value to that. Both will do the same thing for me. So push is doing what? It is adding a new entry at the end or in the next available slot. And next available slot, not actually -1, because -1 is already filled. So I want to fill it at the next available slot. So task list dot length is the next available slot. You remember, indexes are starting from 0 in arrays, and it goes up to length -1. So length -1 is already occupied, and I am not going to overwrite that. So I want to make it added to the next slot, and the next slot's index will be length itself, right? So both will do the same for me, but this is more convenient because it is not just adding the item, it is also returning me the value of length. So it does two things together, and that is more convenient way, but effect for both will be the same. So I am ignoring this approach and using the better approach of making a function call, right? Okay, function will always have more than what you generally do crudely. Function will encapsulate a lot of steps. All right. So now my data is captured, and it is, my inputs are captured, and it is assembled together in an object which is named as task here, and then that object is added to the list of tasks. So that is another object, but an array type of object. So my inputs are now available in the task list array. So the next task, so addition is done. The data is captured and put up in the data list. Now I have a task to build or rebuild the visualization. So the data is captured from this section, and now it has to be displayed here. So this whole section should refresh itself, because many things would have happened here, and it is easier to repaint the whole section than just modifying a small section for me. We can do a modification of the given section only if I have full control over what has changed, but for the time being I prefer to rebuild the entire lower section. Okay, and that logic is written in refresh task list, and this is a little complicated logic, so I will explain you one by one. So what is happening here is it is taking hold of a element with id task list. So let's go and see where is that element. So this is the element, and which is inside the lower section, and this is now a div. Okay, and this is like a placeholder div where the task items will be listed one by one. Okay, and this is no more required because it is not a UL. I was changing it from UL to div, so this style was required. I did not want to show the list style type, which is disk by default. Now it is a div, so it will not even have that list style type applied, so I can remove this too. Okay, so this is showing up here. This is a placeholder, and I get hold of that because that is where my task items will be listed. So first thing what I do in the refresh task list is to get hold of this element where my content will be put up. Okay, and then if you remember, there was a property inner HTML on elements, and that indicates the content or the body content of the element. So what I can do, I can read the content or I can change the content using the same property. So I say task list element dot inner HTML to empty. That means I remove the inner content of this particular div. So cleaning up. So I just cleaned up the content that was existing because I'm refreshing. So I start with cleaning up. Then I have a button, and ignore that button part for now. So now I am doing what? I am looking at the data that I had created earlier. So this is a variable. Remember, this is the ID in quotes. So that is different from the variable that I have here. So this task list actually refers to the variable array. And now, at least on the first click, the data has been captured, the input has been captured, so it has at least one item. So, but I am still playing safe, and I say, well, if the task list is defined and initialized, yes, it is initialized with an empty array. So this will result into true. And the second part of this logical operation is task list dot length is greater than 0. Now, at least one element is there or one item is there in the task list. Initially, there will be nothing. So even if this is true, this will be false, and overall it will be false. So the if block will not get executed, and instead else block will get executed. And what is happening in the else block? The first statement is about the button, ignore that. And what is happening here is the task list element where the inner HTML was earlier cleaned is getting a new inner HTML. And what is being put up here is quite simple. A new div element is getting added, and with styles, few styles, and most important thing is it is saying no task in the list, right? So that is how we see this when there are no items present in the list of tasks. This will show up, okay? That is how it will work, okay? And just in case the task list has at least one item, it is not equal to 0, then this if block will get executed. And first item is about the button, ignore it for now. Then what I am doing is on the task list array, there is a function called for each. We saw for each in the list of functions available with array. We have used one function, push. We are going to use the second function, which is called for each. And this for each function basically accepts another function as an argument. Now, I have been telling you that a function can accept another function as an argument, or a function can be used as a data, right? So I am doing what? I have defined a function inline here. Now, this is basically a function. So let me explain this construct. This is the shortcut way of defining a function, but I can define it like this. I say function handle, or rather I say process task for view, something like this, because that's the purpose, and I define this function. Now this function that is acceptable to for each can have 3 arguments. That is the definition of for each function, because for each function accepts a function which can accept up to 3 arguments. The first argument is the item. Now what is for each doing? It will iterate over each element and it will make a call to the given function one by one. So for each item in the task list, it will execute the given function once. And when it is executing, it is passing few values. The first thing is the element itself, the current element and its index and the whole list. Okay, and what is the element? Suppose I have added one task, so the first task, and index will be 0 and list will be the entire task list itself, right? So this is how I can define this function, and then I'm saying, well, you build this whole task items content. Okay, so this is how I can define a function, and instead of making call to this, I could have made a call to a function, just passing the function which says process task for view. Task for view. This would have been acceptable because here it requires a definition of function, just definition or a reference to the definition. So when I pass the name of the function, it is the whole definition gets inside. But I did not do that because this will be called only once in one place. So JavaScript 6 has introduced a new way which is called a arrow function notation. Arrow function notation is like okay, so I remove few things. In the arrow function, the function keyword is gone. Even the function name is gone. You only give the list of arguments possible or parameter list, and then you put this arrow notation. And then this is still a function definition, right? So that's the structure that I'm using in the for each function argument. And what is happening here is it is defining a function right there, and then that definition is passed into the for each. Okay, the advantage of this is when I'm defining the function here, all other attributes or variables that are available in this larger scope is also available to this body. So I am able to pass this variable also in addition to the three things that is coming from the for each function call. So there are many such usefulness of defining an arrow function. The simplest or the most common use of defining an arrow function is that if that function is to be called only at this place, if it does not require to be called from anywhere else, just not define it separately, define it here and here itself. So now if I write it like this, you can recognize this as equivalent to the definition that I was making here, right? So this whole construct looks like a function that I would have built here. And this is a function definition. So I defined the arrow function, and this is a new way of defining functions, a shorter way, and it works in situations like this. And this is the best approach actually to define and use arrow functions. All right, so basically a function definition is passed into for each, and for each does what? It iterates through the items one by one and then invokes this function or executes this function by passing the right kind of arguments. And the arguments are the item itself, in the index of the item, and then the list. Okay. So then the main logic of building the task item is executed. And here we have the whole logic of creating the visual for the task item. Now this has to be HTML, right? Now JavaScript gives you two ways of creating HTML. One simple way is adding into inner HTML of a parent tag, right? So that's the quick simple way of adding the new content to inner HTML. That's considered crude way, but in many cases that is more helpful than using the formal way of creating elements and then attaching attributes by creating attributes first and then attaching by making calls to create element, append child, create attribute and set attribute, all those kind of things. So that will make things much lengthier if you have so many things to do. So this is a quicker, shorter way introduced again in JavaScript 6, and we are going to use it here because it is more convenient. What we are doing here is we are creating a template string. And to do that, I am using a special notation. So it is also looking like a multi-line string. Multi-line string. When you create a string in JavaScript, you can put things in single quote or double quote, but as soon as you break it into multiple lines, the executor will complain. But if you had to have multi-line inputs, then you have a way. Use this notation called backtick. We have used that earlier. Actually not. We use the title, and title and backtick are on the same key on your keyboard generally. So if you press shift and then that key, it will put title, but if you just press that key, it will give you this inverted or reversed quote, which is formally called backtick. So a pair of backtick and the content inside that allows you to have text on multiple lines. And that is what I am using. In addition to allowing multiple lines in the backticked string, it also has a template behavior. Template behavior means that in the whole string, I can embed some JavaScript calls like this. So anything which is starting with a dollar and a pair of curly braces is treated like a substitution expression. That means whatever is written inside the pair of curly braces inside this template, right? This is how you have to differentiate dollar dollar curly braces open, curly braces close. So this whole thing is called a template, and which has to be resolved by the JavaScript. And how will it resolve is that it will start substituting the value of the expression in the whole text before it is used. So here what you have, it says task.title, and task is what it has come into this, and task is what it is, one of the elements from the task list. And now you remember what you added to the task list. You added task object to the task list. And what is the task object? It has three properties: title, desk, and status. Correct? So what I am using here is all three properties one by one. Here in this H3 section, I'm saying take the title value and place it instead of this whole thing. Take the title value associated with this task object and display. In this p tag, I'm saying take the description value of the task and then place it here. And for status, I have done something more. So I said if the status is active, use this value or use this value. And these values are indirectly going to refer to a style class definition. So and style class definition, as you know, will be a string. So I define this string variable by checking on the status, and conditionally I'm using one or the other value, and that value is being substituted in this portion of the string. Again, similar notation, dollar and a pair of curly braces, and this variable's value has been calculated, and so whatever is the current value, that gets added here. Now it's a different matter that this results into, or this is indicative of a class definition, and in this class property of the div, I have one named class and one dynamically calculated class. Okay, so all of this is done to build the div for a particular task, and a lot of JavaScript 6 features have been used. In this case, the template text, and that helps me create a more complicated HTML construct easily. Otherwise, I had to create a p tag and set the inner text or inner HTML of that. I had to create a h3 tag and set the inner HTML. I had to create a hr tag. Now all three tags or all three elements are created, and I have to now create a div tag and then append this and this element into that. And then on the div tag, I had to set the class property, and I had to set on click property to these things. So many statements that would have got me this construct, and I could do it so simply using the template. And this template actually tells me exactly how it will look like in the HTML page. So it is much easier to recognize what will be the output than using the proper DOM methods. Now DOM methods, I'm saying that is quite useful, but you could use this also if you are going to create new HTML content. This is crude way, but quite useful with the capacities that are now available through JavaScript 6 template text, right? All right, so once this is available to me, I said parent.innerHTML, and then this operator, which is saying plus equals, means add and assign. So it is as good as this. It is equivalent to so both statements are actually getting you the same result, but the earlier one is a shorter way. So you do use this operator to do actually the same thing. What is happening in the second statement here? It first takes the current value of inner HTML, so it may have some content, and then adds the new content to that, appends the new content to that, and the total content is now what? Text. And so that text is passed back or assigned back to inner HTML, so that you have a newer text or newer content added to inner HTML of the parent. And what is the parent? This parent is coming from the place where this function was invoked. And here the parent, which is the first argument, is nothing but the element with ID task list. So this particular element, which was cleaned up earlier, right? Here you cleaned it up immediately after taking that element, you cleaned it up. So now you are building task by task the divs and appending to the inner HTML, and that is how everything seems to build up. So let's go back and now try to add the content again. So if I have something empty, for example, initially, let me refresh for safety, and I press on add, it shows me this message. And why is that happening? The add button was pressed, and add button press will do what? It will invoke this function, add new task, and then add new function, task function gets executed, and it is taking hold of the elements, and then on the title it is taking the value and trimming, and when it is trimming and then checking for the length, it gets 0. That means this results into false. That means this block will not get executed, and the alternative block gets executed. An alternative block has a logic to show the alert and then stop the execution of this function right away, and that is what showed up right now. You can match the same statement, and once I press the OK, the next statement that gets executed is return. So none of the rest of the things will happen. And if it was not allowed, the refresh of task list will also not happen. Okay, so I said okay. So now I add some practical values, say T1, and I'm not putting anything in description, but there is no check on the description's content. The check is only on the title, so most likely it will be accepted. And why? Because T1's length is more than 0. So this particular section gets executed, and the alternative is not executed. So it will proceed, and for the desk, it will take the next element's value, and status will be set to active, and this whole object will be pushed to task list, and then the refresh of task list will happen. And refresh of task list, I explained how the UI portion for the task and for all the tasks that have been added so far in the list will get built up. So I press on add, and then what? This thing is getting created. And I add another task, T2, and I say task 2, and then that is added, and that is added to the task list. Now task list remembers whatever has been added so far. So in the push, it already had one item and it got the next item, and then the refresh of whole task list happened. So for each of the task list, that means for each of the tasks present in the task list, this function gets called, and it is building this section one by one, and each of them is getting added to the task list element, and that is how both are now showing up here. And that goes on and on, right? So if I add task 3 and they add, another one gets added here, right? And I can scroll to see the whole thing here. Fine. So this is how I can see all of the content getting added. Now there is a button which will help me remove everything from the task list. Now this button is added in the page somewhere. And this button is here in the task list section, okay? And it has a simple on click, which is again a function call remove all tasks, and that must have been defined somewhere to work. And what is happening here? It is simply removing everything from the task list. And how is it doing that? By reinitializing the task list to an empty list. What does that do? When it will get inside the refreshment of task list, it will find no item in the task list. And then you remember the alternative logic, which will print this red color thing, which will have a message in the red, and the message says no task in the list, right? So dynamically, this whole thing works for me. And in addition to showing this, the button disappears. Why? Because I believed that the button makes sense only when there are task items. What will you remove if there are no items? So the button should appear or display only when there are task items listed. If there are no tasks, the buttons should not appear. And that is the logic, additional logic, that was put up in the refresh task list, which I continuously said to ignore. And what I did was I got hold of the button, and whenever I'm checking or wherever I'm checking the list of items and the length of the items, and if I have more than one or more than 0 item, that means the button should display. And then on that button's style property and the display style, I said inline. That means the display should be inline. And if there are no items, I'm saying style display none. Do you remember this? We did this earlier also in our biodata page example. We were showing this, setting the style display conditionally whenever we had to show a particular section and the other section should disappear. So there the value was block, of course, but here because it is a button, I would want to show it inline and not as a block. So I am setting the display between none and inline. Somewhere when it is not to be displayed, the style display is set to none. When it has to display, I'm setting style display to inline. Okay, so this is how the visibility of the button is controlled. So when there are no items to list, the button also disappears, and when there are items to list, button appears because it gives you a way to remove all items from the list, right? So this is how it works so far. Now the last part of the functionality is when you have the task and you want to change the status. And when you change the status, how do you do that? By just clicking on the whole section. Okay, and when you click on this, you want to perform certain action, right? You want to respond to the clicks, and this is happening. So when I do a click, and where am I clicking? On the div or the visual element for a task. So suppose I add another task and I click on this, the appearance changes only for the second one and not for the first section. So certainly this action handler is added to the element which is building this whole part. And where is this whole part for a task is created? If you can recall, it is inside this build task item and this whole template thing that I explained. So the whole template is basically placed inside a div, and here I have also put up an on-click property, and in on-click property I said toggle status, and toggle status would be a function which is taking one argument, and this argument is again set dynamically because this is using a template dollar pair of curly braces, and that is taking the index. That means this task which was at a particular index of the task list. Fine. So toggle status gets invoked with a number, and if I have clicked on the first task, it will pass in 0. If I clicked on the second task, it will pass in 1. So toggle function, a toggle status function is called. So let's go and see what is the toggle status function doing. So toggle status function is accepting the index. Okay, so the value 0 or 1 comes into this depending on which div was clicked, which task div was clicked. Okay, so what is happening here is now it is taking the element present at that index. Okay, so this is how you are accessing the element at a particular index from the array. Remember, arrays are numbered index. There are no names for the elements. So the only way to access a particular element is to pass in the index or the number inside a big bracket after the name of the array variable, and that gives you the element put up at that object or that index of the array. And once I get that, I know the element that are there is of task type. So and it is not necessary to use the variable name task, but it is so obvious that the element that I got is a task, and then task has a property called status. Now this task is an object. Array is numbered, but the object that are put up on every element or as every element are individually objects, and all those objects have 3 properties individually. So I am interested in the status value, right? Status value, and I am conditionally changing that. So if the task status was active, and when it was created, the task status was set to active. So initially that will be the case. And if it was active, I'm changing it to inactive. And once it was inactive, this will result into false. So in that case, alternative part will get executed, and I can know that, well, if it is not active, it is inactive. So the second time when I click for the same index, the status has changed to inactive already. So this will result into false. So else block will get executed, and here I am again setting it to active. And then after every such click, I am refreshing the whole task list section. So everything is recreated. The whole lower section content is getting recreated. So when I click on this, toggle status function is called with the index, and I know when I click on this, 0 will pass in, and from the list item, 0th, or rather the first element will be picked up, and on that object which has the title, description, and a hidden status will be changed. Right now it is active, so it will be changed to inactive. Once it will be inactive and I click again, same objects at the same index will currently have the status to inactive, so it will be switched over to active. So whatever may be the case, the object's property has changed, and objects are still present in the array. So the array is intact, only the attributes of the elements have changed. And when I do a refresh of the whole visualization, based on the current status, it was setting the style. Do you remember this? Based on the current status, it was setting the style, and in that, the style is defined separately for active and for inactive. And in active, it is saying background color pale turquoise, text decoration none, while in inactive, background color is light slate gray and text decoration is line through. And that is what is done when the status was inactive. This class gets applied, while status was active, this class gets applied. And so that is how this behavior is visible. Correct? So this is how we have implemented a whole lot of functionality in this. And in this process, we used objects. We understood what an object is, how we differentiate between an object type of variable and other type of variable. Remember, a pair of curly braces indicate it's an object type. And then we added properties to the object. We read the properties. We changed the value of the property. We changed the value of status on the clicks. Okay. And then we have an array which stores objects, and it can store everything or anything, but I am adding the objects. And then for each of the element in the array, we created unique visualizations. And for that, we used the for each function. We also used the length property of the array. We also used a couple of properties and behaviors on the string object. We used the trim function. We used the length property on the string. Okay, then we are cleaning up the array. We are pushing elements into the array using the push function. So we used so many things. And more interestingly, we used two of the ES6 functionalities. We used for each also, which is introduced in ES6, but something very unique about ES6, which is not related to array, was the arrow function, which is a quicker, shorter way of defining functions in line when it is to be used and where it is to be used, which does not require me to use the function keyword, do not need me to specify the name of the function, just get the list of parameters and an arrow key and the body of the function. And arrow function has more things about it, but I'm not going into that today because that I leave it for the advanced classes with JavaScript. The second thing that we used, which is quite powerful now, is the template text. That also gave me a way to define multi-line string using the backticks as the quotes. Instead of single quote or double quotes, we can use backtick, pair of backtick to define multi-line string in the JavaScript code. And that also introduces template text or templates to be substituted. And for that, we used what? Dollar and a pair of curly braces. And inside that pair of curly braces, you can have expressions, and that expressions result will be substituted in the text before it is used. We also used inner HTML, interestingly, the property associated with every element, to reconstruct the content of an element. It would have been possible to do the same using the official DOM methods, which is create element, append child, etc., that we used the other day. But today we used inner HTML to extensively create content of a pretty large and complex content so easily. We could have done that by making multiple calls to build the tree structure. Right. So this way we are able to style the elements separately and build the whole content dynamically, and it's a pretty powerful application that we have built together. Right. So we are now familiar with strong capabilities of JavaScript, but this is not the end of JavaScript. This is just the beginning. There are so many features and functionalities available in JavaScript. We have just used the if-else block. There are many other blocks, as I mentioned. There are many other constructs available through ES6 and earlier. There are many other functionalities out of the box available in terms of various object types like date object, number object, etc. There are numerous things that are possible using JavaScript. And JavaScript is also not just for client side, that is to be used in web pages. It can be used to develop nowadays standalone applications. So anything which you can do on a command line or in a backend application without HTML, without browser, DOM, you can do all of that pretty much using JavaScript. So that is altogether different part of learning JavaScript, which is the server side JavaScript. So I'm not going to cover that in this this course. That's way too complicated for you. But so far what you have done is great. You are able to create a static web application or web sites where you have only text and images, and then using various styles you make it work. Then you gradually move towards creating a dynamic application, and using the capabilities of JavaScript, we have created quite a capable dynamic application right now. Tomorrow, we are going to focus on the visual effects again. On this dynamic application, we will try to apply some advanced styling through, say, animations, etc., and we will make it more interesting. We will also touch upon the responsive web design. That means the page that we have, will it work good or will it appear good on a mobile phone, for example? So it is appearing good on mobile phone. I have a smaller screen and it works. It tends to work fine, but to some extent, after a certain extent, it seems to disappear in terms of the width, right? You have something going away, so things are not visible. But can it be more adaptable? Okay, and right now when I am seeing it on a desktop, it is wasting so lot of spaces. So can we make it more compact and use this space? Can I have a different layout when I am seeing the same screen on different screen sizes? That is what is called responsive web design, and we will take a look at that too tomorrow. All right, so that's the end of today. Any question before we end the session? Just a suggestion, keep practicing. You have learned a lot in last 1.5 week time. So do not forget to practice. The first week is actually good enough for you to become a or claim yourself as a website creator. And I told you on Friday that you are good enough, you have good enough knowledge to build a website using only HTML and CSS. Today and in this week, we are focusing on making the content more dynamic and then start handling the user inputs, etc. So this may look a little complicated, but this is giving you too much power to build dynamic web pages and web applications. So earlier, what you learned is good as a website. Now, actually, what you are doing is equivalent to creating web applications. So keep practicing. And to practice, you have to refer to a lot of material which is available on internet, and pose questions to me. You can send me questions offline if you are struggling, and I will help you with some reading content or some guidance. Okay, so that's the end of the day, and as usual, this will be posted on YouTube and you can refer that again there. Thank you for being with me. Thank you.